We begin NFL Live with a developing story out of Detroit where the Lions got some big news this afternoon. Dan Graziano, what's going on?
Yeah, Ben Johnson, the Lions offensive coordinator, going to be staying in Detroit. He was thought to be a candidate for the remaining 2 head coach openings in Washington and Seattle, but it didn't match up at this time, so he is going back to Detroit for another year as the Lions offensive coordinator, which has been a real good job for him. He's done a real good job for them, and presumably we will hear Ben Johnson's name again next January when next year's head coaching cycle ramps up.
Yeah, that makes sense, and also really good for the Lions, to your point. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But Graz, Johnson staying put means he won't be the Commanders' next head coach. So what do we know about the search in Washington?
They talked last night with Mike McDonald, the Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator, who I'm told is a strong candidate in Washington and Seattle. Seattle's talking to him today. Washington also had a second interview this morning with Dan Quinn, the Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator. And then they headed out to Detroit, where the original plan was to talk to Lions defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson. They're not going to talk to Johnson, of course, as we already established, but they are interviewing Aaron Glenn a second time as well. So those 3 candidates, they've talked to another couple. You know, Anthony Weaver, the Ravens defensive line coach, got a second interview there. Bobby Slowick, the Texans offensive coordinator. But it sounds like McDonald and Quinn and possibly Glenn are the names to watch in Washington's search at this point.
Yeah, and you had a little rhyme there, Graz. You're with us all show. Okay, so don't go anywhere. Lots of news to get to. Mina Kimes and Marcus Spears here today for the hour. Mina, we're going to start with you. Hey, Swag, with Johnson now off the table, is there a name you like in Washington?
Well, let's start here. Whoever is chosen as the head coach, what will determine his success is whether or not they can identify the quarterback of the future. They have the 2nd overall pick in the draft, and then build the team around them, cater an offense to him, develop him. Now, you look at Houston as being, I think, the best example of a team that's done precisely that this year with C.J. Stroud. And while there's certainly no guarantee you'll find a quarterback who can match Stroud's prowess, undeniably it has to be appealing to see that Bobby Slowick, who's one of the candidates there, oversaw that offense. However, Laura, that doesn't mean you should overlook a defensive head coach, because Bobby Slowick plays for a defensive head coach in D'Amico Ryans. I think the key, though, is if you do go in the direction of defense, whether it's Dan Quinn, Mike McDonald, what have you, Aaron Glenn, they need to have a plan for the offense the way D'Amico Ryans clearly did coming into Houston, bringing Slowick with him from San Francisco. So I know it's a bit of a cop-out answer because you wanted a name and I'm more giving you a philosophy, but I think that's what's most important when they pick a candidate is, whoever he is, do you have a plan for the quarterback?
MK, I like the point that you made about D'Amico Ryans and Slowick, because D'Amico left San Francisco where offense was a premium and it was done at a very high level. So he had some recall there. But my question is, what the hell is going on with Mike VRABEL? Like, why is Mike VRABEL name not a part of this coaching cycle and these teams that are looking for a head coach? I understand what happened in Tennessee, but there was a lot of movement roster-wise in Tennessee too. So we got Graz on today. We got these phenomenal reporters. Can somebody tell me why Mike VRABEL name is not a hot name for a coaching candidate between both of these places?
I think in this cycle, there has been a real sense of like, let's look a little deeper than usual, maybe get some new names involved. So it's not necessarily something against VRABEL that's keeping him from there. I know what happened in Tennessee, the fallout with him and the GM, and they felt like it wasn't collaborative enough. And maybe that turned out to be a red flag for some teams. But obviously VRABEL, a very successful head coach, and likely will be again. I just think this cycle we've seen teams look a little beyond the obvious in guys like Brian Callahan and Raheem Morris, Antonio Pierce, who might not have been candidates in recent years, I think, or in previous years, are getting these jobs.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of us, when VRABEL was let go in Tennessee, we said he might be one of the first off the board with some of these openings. That hasn't been the case. We'll keep an eye on it. Either way, the Lions getting to hold on to Ben Johnson is a great thing for them. So let's dive into that side of it. Their offense has been fantastic under Johnson. They lead the NFL in yards per game in the last 2 seasons and rank in the top 5 in points, yards per play, and total QBR. Mina, just how big is this, the return of Johnson for this Lions offense?
This is enormous. I was thinking about how after the Lions lost, we heard Dan Campbell speaking to the difficulty of getting back to the position that they were in the championship game, very honestly and genuinely, as he often does. Well, this, to me, is the single biggest thing they could have done to get them back in that position. It was the single biggest hole going into next year if they had lost Ben Johnson. The way I would put his importance to this team, Laura, is this. If they were to move on from him, whoever the next offensive coach is would probably want to replicate a lot of the things Ben Johnson did in Detroit. The diversity in the run game, the way they targeted the middle of the field, the way he used his skill players. But as we saw in Philadelphia, quite frankly, having lost Shane Steichen, it's one thing to say, okay, we're going to run the same offense. It's another to have a play caller who is incredibly adept at sequencing plays, at adjusting in game. Johnson is so good at using different formations and personnel groupings, then building off of those as the game goes on to confuse defenses. Now they don't have that problem of replacing it because he's coming back, and I expect this offense to pick up right where they left off this season.
Yeah, it feels dangerous for anyone trying to play the Lions next season. So, Graz, as we spin ahead to the offseason, what kind of capital does Detroit have, and where do you think they need to spend it specifically?
Well, I think a lot of it, Laura, is going to be spent on extensions for some of their premium guys on offense. Jared Goff is heading into the final year of his contract, scheduled to make $27.3 million next year. That's obviously a pretty good deal for an NFL starting quarterback, especially a good one. So they'll look to extend him. Penei Sewell, the left tackle, and Amon-Ra St. Brown, their star wide receiver, are both up for extensions for the first time. They can pick up the fifth-year option on Sewell and delay that a year or two. But St. Brown, they don't have that luxury. He was not a first-round pick. So you see here the projected cap space, a good, solid number. And the draft, obviously, they've done a good job in the draft in the last couple of years. And then, defensively, they weren't great in the secondary. They needed to add a pass rusher. So I think if they're spending that cap money on something other than extensions, you can probably expect it to be spent trying to find some playmakers on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, Graz, I love that you went defense, and I'm going up front because we talked about Detroit all season long not being able to get to the passer with four, and we know how important that is and how vital it becomes, especially when you're trying to make a playoff run. They hit a home run with Aiden Hutchinson. A game came on late in the season, but there was just not enough. Aaron Glenn actually had to go to creating pressure in order to get the quarterbacks and force them off the spot. They need to add depth and help there with guys that can win one-on-ones, because I think that this team is close now, and I'm with you, Graza, as far as the secondary help, and a lot of guys are available in the secondary. There are some phenomenal defensive tackles that are free agents this year that'll be looking for big-time paydays. The one that comes to mind is Justin Matabike. Chris Jones could be a potential guy on that market as well. So Detroit needs to get the work up front, and I got considerable evidence that Brad Holmes understands that too, the general manager for Detroit.
Yeah, Mina and I had the same smile there thinking about adding a couple of those names that you mentioned there, Marcus, to that Detroit D-line.